The room was tense, the kind of silence that only comes when everyone knows something explosive is about to happen. Bill O'Reilly leaned forward, his voice dripping with arrogance as he dismissed Jasmine Crockett's career with a smirk. It wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge, hurled in front of millions, meant to belittle not just her, but every person who has ever fought for dignity in the face of power. For a moment, the air froze. Senators shifted uncomfortably. The cameras zoomed closer, and the audience leaned in, sensing they were about to witness something unforgettable. O'Reilly thought he had the upper hand. He thought his years of bluster and dominance would silence a rising star. But he underestimated the fire that had carried Jasmine Crockett from humble beginnings to the center of America's most heated political arena. And then she spoke. Her words didn't just answer him. They cut through his arrogance like a blade through glass. Calm, sharp, and unshakable, Crockett turned his insult into a revelation. What O'Reilly intended as humiliation became the very stage for her most powerful declaration yet. The room changed instantly. Gasps, murmurs, and then a stunned silence settled in. This wasn't just a political clash. This was a battle of eras, of values, of two Americas colliding in real time. One clinging to privilege and mockery, the other rising with resilience, dignity, and truth. And what she said next didn't just silence O'Reilly. It left the entire audience speechless, staring at a woman who had just rewritten the rules of power inside those walls. But the real shock was yet to come, because what happened after her response would ripple far beyond that chamber, across the nation, and into history itself. The clash between Bill O'Reilly and Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another heated exchange. It was the kind of moment that reveals everything about the state of America. O'Reilly didn't attack her policies. He didn't challenge her arguments. Instead, he went after her career, her worth, the very foundation of who she is as a leader. And that choice mattered, because it showed the audience exactly what was at stake. This wasn't politics as usual. This was about respect, identity, and the right to take up space in halls of power that were never built for voices like Jasmine's. The insult struck a nerve, not only with Crockett, but with millions watching. For many, it echoed something deeply personal. The feeling of working twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. The sting of being dismissed, belittled, or told you don't belong. O'Reilly's words weren't just his. They became the voice of every barrier that stands in the way of progress. And that's why the moment was so electric. Because everyone understood the deeper fight unfolding in front of them. Cory Booker, seated just a few rows away, saw it immediately. His eyes didn't leave Crockett as the words sank in, as the chamber's atmosphere shifted from uncomfortable to explosive. He knew that if Jasmine responded the way she always had, steady, composed, unapologetically herself, it would become more than a rebuttal. It would become a statement. And he was right. But here's where the stakes rose even higher. Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself. Every word she delivered was loaded with the weight of history, of women who had been silenced, of communities dismissed as unworthy, of generations told to wait their turn. That's what O'Reilly never understood. He thought he was debating a politician. In reality, he was facing a movement. The cameras captured every flicker of her expression, every deliberate pause, every razor-sharp syllable that followed. And as she dismantled his insult piece by piece, you could feel the tension breaking, like a glass ceiling cracking in real time. The chamber wasn't just listening. It was learning. And outside those walls, the impact was already spreading. Social media lit up. Viewers clipped the moment, #surge, and people across the country began sharing their own stories, tying their struggles to Crockett's words. What began as a single insult had transformed into a national conversation about dignity, representation, and power. O'Reilly never saw it coming. He thought he had delivered the final word. Instead, he had set the stage for his own undoing. Because Crockett wasn't just about to answer his insult. She was about to deliver a counterpunch so powerful, it would leave the Senate chamber reeling and the country watching in stunned silence. And when that moment came, it was bigger than any debate, bigger than politics. It was history in the making. Bill O'Reilly has never been a stranger to controversy. For decades, he thrived on confrontation, building his reputation by tearing down others with sharp quips, relentless interruptions, and a smug certainty that no one could touch him. His rise was fueled not by empathy or fairness, but by spectacle, by creating villains out of everyday Americans who dared to challenge his worldview. In his world, shouting was strength, and belittling others was proof of dominance. But beneath that carefully cultivated image of confidence lay contradictions that grew harder to ignore. He positioned himself as a champion of the working class, yet dismissed the very struggles of people who looked like Jasmine Crockett. He branded himself as a truth-teller, yet often twisted facts to fit his narrative. He claimed to defend American values, but his version of America always seemed to exclude those who didn't share his privilege or power. When O'Reilly sat across from Crockett, all of that history pressed into the room. This wasn't just about one insult. It was decades of arrogance crashing headfirst into a new generation of leadership. He saw her as someone to put in her place, to remind her the old order where men like him dominated the stage and voices like hers were relegated to the sidelines. To him, this was just another moment to flex his influence. But what he underestimated was the audience. Times had changed. The very bluster that once won him ratings now rang hollow to a public hungry for authenticity. His smirk didn't project confidence anymore. It revealed insecurity. His insult didn't land as humor. It exposed fear. O'Reilly wasn't the towering figure he once imagined himself to be. He was a relic of a fading era, still clinging to the tactics that once kept challengers at bay. And when he aimed those tactics at Crockett, it didn't silence her. It amplified her. Every sneer, every dismissive tone, every arrogant phrase only set the stage for a takedown that would showcase just how out of touch O'Reilly had become. Because the truth was clear. This wasn't Crockett fighting for a career. This was Crockett fighting for every person O'Reilly had spent his career dismissing. And soon, the balance of power in that chamber would shift in a way he could never undo. Jasmine Crockett's journey began far from the marble columns of Washington. Her roots were grounded in neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce, but resilience ran deep. She was not born into wealth or legacy. She was born into a reality that demanded fight. From an early age, she understood what it meant to be underestimated, to be told she was aiming too high, to feel the sting of doors closing before she even had the chance to knock. But where others saw barriers, Crockett saw reasons to push harder. In classrooms where teachers doubted her potential, she studied late into the night. In spaces where her voice was dismissed, she learned how to sharpen it into a weapon of truth. She wasn't simply preparing for a career. She was preparing for a battlefield, one where dignity and justice were the ultimate stakes. Law became her calling not because it was glamorous, but because it was necessary. Crockett entered courtrooms filled with skepticism, where opposing attorneys sized her up before she even spoke. Yet time and again, she proved them wrong. Her fire came from lived experience, the kind that couldn't be taught in lecture halls. Every case she fought was more than a legal matter. It was personal. She carried the stories of those overlooked, silenced, and written off, turning them into fuel for her relentless pursuit of justice. Her path into politics was not a calculated climb, but a natural extension of that fight. She ran for office because she had seen firsthand how laws weren't just words on paper. They were lifelines or weapons, depending on who held the pen. In her campaigns, she didn't promise perfection. She promised presence. She would stand where others refused to stand. She would speak when silence was easier, and the people responded, not because she offered them fairy tales, but because she offered them the truth. By the time Crockett entered the national stage, she carried with her something rarer than ambition: authenticity. She wasn't molded by political consultants or focus groups. She was shaped by community, struggle, and faith in justice. That authenticity is what made her dangerous to people like Bill O'Reilly. He thrived on caricatures, on painting opponents as hollow, weak, or unworthy. But Crockett gave him no caricature to exploit. She was too real, too grounded, too undeniable. And it was precisely this background, the scars of struggle, the victories earned against dismissal, the grit carved into her very being, that set the stage for what was about to happen. Because when O'Reilly tried to reduce her to a punchline, he forgot one thing. Jasmine Crockett's entire life had prepared her for moments just like this. What came next would not only silence a powerful critic, it would remind the entire nation why voices like hers are impossible to erase. The studio lights burned hotter than usual that night, or maybe it was the tension crackling through the air. Bill O'Reilly leaned back in his chair, his expression smug, his voice sharpened with that familiar edge of superiority. He had built his brand on confrontation, mocking, belittling, and pressing until his opponents broke under the weight of his sneers. To him, this was just another round in a long career of verbal sparring. But tonight, he wasn't prepared for Jasmine Crockett. From the very beginning, O'Reilly set the tone. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "your career seems more about theatrics than substance. Do you even understand what serious governance requires?" The words were designed to sting, to reduce her years of service to a punchline. A few in the audience chuckled nervously, leaning into performance, expecting Crockett to falter. But she didn't. She sat forward, eyes locked on him, her silence sharper than any rebuttal. O'Reilly mistook that silence for weakness. He pressed harder. "You've made a career shouting about injustice, but shouting doesn't make policy. Passion doesn't build nations. Maybe you belong in a protest, not in Congress." The escalation was clear. He wasn't debating policy. He was questioning her right to exist in the chamber she fought so hard to enter. The audience shifted uneasily now. This was no longer entertaining. It was cruel. Still, Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she let O'Reilly keep talking. The more he spoke, the more obvious imbalance became. Arrogance against composure. Insult against dignity. His voice rose. His gestures grew sharper, but each attack seemed to ricochet off her calm. Finally, she leaned in, her voice steady but cutting. "Bill, what you call theatrics, I call survival. What you dismiss as shouting is what millions of Americans have been forced to do just to be heard." The crowd stirred. O'Reilly blinked, caught off guard for the first time. But he quickly tried to recover, smirking, shaking his head, and doubling down. "That's not survival. That's victimhood. And victimhood doesn't deserve applause." Gasps rippled through the audience. The line had crossed into dangerous territory, exposing not just arrogance but contempt. Crockett's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained calm, almost surgical. "You mistake resilience for weakness because you've never had to fight for your seat at the table. Some of us didn't inherit our place. We built it." The tension hit its peak. O'Reilly opened his mouth to respond, but the crowd's reaction, cheers, claps, murmurs of agreement, cut through him like static drowning out his signal. He was losing control, and for the first time, he knew it. The debate was no longer about policy. It was about dignity versus derision, truth versus arrogance. Crockett hadn't even unleashed her full counterattack yet, but already the momentum had shifted. The stage was set for a moment that would do more than silence her critic. It would redefine the entire confrontation. And when that moment came, it wouldn't just leave the audience in shock. It would leave Bill O'Reilly without a leg to stand on. The studio had grown restless, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. O'Reilly's words still hung in the air, bitter and dismissive, but they no longer carried the weight they once did. The audience had shifted. They weren't laughing with him anymore. They were waiting for Jasmine Crockett to answer. And then she did. Her voice came low, deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of lived truth. "Bill, you talk about my career as if it's some performance, some play for attention. But let me tell you, when you grow up in communities where opportunity is scarce, you don't perform, you fight. Every step I've taken was a fight, and every scar I carry proves that I belong here." The room hushed. O'Reilly tilted his head, smirk still plastered across his face, but there was a flicker of something else now, unease. Crockett didn't let the silence slip away. She pressed forward, her words now striking like hammer blows. "You sit there and dismiss passion as weakness. But passion built this country. Passion ended slavery. Passion secured women the right to vote. Passion marched across bridges in Selma and forced this nation to live up to its promises. Without passion, America would still be chained to its darkest chapters." The audience broke into applause, a ripple that quickly turned into a roar. O'Reilly shifted in his seat, trying to regain footing, but Crockett had seized the narrative, and she wasn't letting go. "And you," she continued, turning her gaze directly at him, Talk about victimhood as if acknowledging injustice is some kind of flaw. No, Bill. Victimhood is pretending you've earned every advantage you were handed. Victimhood is sitting on top of privilege and mocking those who had to claw their way up with nothing but grit. Gasps echoed. The smirk on O'Reilly's face faltered. The camera caught the tension etched into his jawline, the visible crack in his armor. Crockett leaned in closer, her tone unwavering, each word dripping with clarity. You asked if I understand serious governance. Let me tell you what I understand. I understand what it's like to defend people who couldn't afford justice. I understand what it's like to face institutions that were designed to shut people like me out. I understand what it's like to be told I don't belong, only to prove time and again that I do. That's governance. Bill, that's America. The applause swelled again, now thundering. Viewers at home could feel it. The energy, the power, the undeniable shift in the room. And then came the line that would seal the night, the mic drop moment. Crockett's voice dropped to a calm, devastating register. You may not respect my career, Bill, but you will respect what it represents. Because when you dismiss me, you dismiss every single person who's ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough. And history, believe me, will not remember your smirks. It will remember their fight. The studio went silent for a heartbeat, pure, deafening silence, before erupting into applause so loud it drowned out any attempt at rebuttal. O'Reilly sat back, eyes darting, his smirk gone, his authority shattered. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her truth had filled the room, stripped the arrogance from her opponent, and ignited something far bigger than the debate itself. And beyond that studio, her words were already racing into the bloodstream of America, clipped into viral posts, replayed on news segments, whispered about in living rooms. What had started as an insult ended as a reckoning. But the real explosion was still ahead, because while Crockett had just dismantled her opponent live, the ripple effect outside those walls would prove even more powerful. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words landed, the debate was over, but the ripple effect had only just begun. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were flooding social media. Hashtags like hashtag Respect Crockett and hashtag Mic Drop Moment trended on X and TikTok, carrying her response far beyond the studio. Millions who had never heard her name before were suddenly quoting her lines, replaying her calm but devastating takedown, and declaring her the voice they had been waiting for. Commentators rushed to react. Some tried to downplay the moment, insisting O'Reilly had only been asking tough questions. But those defenses rang hollow as the viral wave grew stronger. Influencers, activists, and even celebrities chimed in, praising Crockett for standing her ground with both dignity and fire. This is what leadership looks like. One post read, racking up hundreds of thousands of likes. Meanwhile, the silence from O'Reilly's camp was deafening. His usual bravado, his trademark counterpunches, were nowhere to be found. For a man who had made a career out of dominating debates, this was different. This time, he hadn't just lost an argument. He had lost a narrative. Inside political circles, the fallout was just as sharp. Lawmakers who once dismissed Crockett as too fiery now found themselves recalculating. Her composure under fire, her ability to turn insult into inspiration, had transformed her from a target into a symbol. The shockwaves were undeniable. Crockett's name was now being spoken with reverence, her words replayed as a rallying cry. What had begun as an insult in the studio had spilled into a national conversation about dignity, resilience, and who truly belonged at America's table. And the momentum was still building, because the moral lesson her words carried was about to echo even louder. When the dust settled, Jasmine Crockett's words stood taller than any insult thrown her way. What lingered wasn't a sneer on O'Reilly's face, but the clarity of her message. Resilience is not weakness, and passion is not theatrics. Her story was more than personal. It was a mirror reflecting the struggles of millions who had been told they didn't belong. She turned what was meant to be humiliation into a universal reminder. The measure of worth is not determined by privilege or inheritance, but by perseverance and sacrifice. In that moment, she wasn't just defending herself. She was speaking for every child told to quiet their dreams, every worker dismissed as replaceable, every immigrant made to feel like a stranger in their own home. Her triumph wasn't about silencing O'Reilly. It was about reframing the debate itself. She reminded America that dignity does not bow to arrogance, and that true strength isn't handed down. It is forged in struggle. The crowd, the viewers, and the millions scrolling through her words online weren't just witnessing a debate. They were witnessing a lesson in what it means to belong. Crockett's mic drop moment proved a timeless truth. Arrogance fades, but authenticity endures. Those who mocked her would be forgotten, but her words, her composure, her fire, they would echo as part of the larger American story. And with that, she left not just O'Reilly, but the entire nation with a challenge. To see dignity where others see weakness, to honor resilience where others dismiss passion, and to finally recognize that the voices too often silenced are the very voices that keep America alive. Jasmine Crockett's response wasn't just a debate moment. It was a turning point. In a single exchange, she flipped the script on arrogance and showed the nation that authenticity, resilience, and truth will always carry more power than condescension. Bill O'Reilly may have walked into that studio expecting another easy target, but what he got instead was a lesson he and the country won't forget. This moment will live on, not because of the insult, but because of the answer. Crockett reminded us all that the fight for dignity isn't abstract. It's real, it's personal, and it belongs to every one of us who has ever been told we don't belong. And now, the story doesn't end here. It continues with you. Share this video. Carry Jasmine Crockett's words into your own conversations. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story of courage, resilience, and truth standing tall against arrogance. Because every time we amplify these voices, we remind America and the world that justice, dignity, and belonging are not negotiable. Her words silence a room. Together, our voices can shake a nation.